I stood in the Goodwill parking lot, watching my son Marcus drive away without a backward glance. The rain had started to fall, light at first, then harder, soaking through my wool coat as I clutched a single cardboard box of donated items. 57. Years old, and I was learning what it felt like to be disposable. The red taillights of his BMW disappeared around the corner, leaving me standing there like a piece of furniture he'd finally decided to get rid of. He'd promised to come back. 20 minutes, he'd said. Just dropping something off at the bank real quick. That was 3 hours ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months, maybe years. But when you love someone with your whole heart, you find ways to explain away the little cruelties, the small betrayals, the gradual erosion of respect. You tell yourself it's temporary stress, work pressure, anything but the truth that's staring you in the face. You tell yourself that family means something, that the bonds you've spent decades building can't just dissolve overnight. You're wrong. Standing there in that parking lot, mascara probably running down my cheeks, I felt something crack inside me. Not break exactly. More like the sound ice makes when it's about to shatter but hasn't quite given way yet. I was Beverly Anderson, a woman who had built a small empire from nothing, who had raised a son as a single mother, who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had. And this was how it ended. Abandoned at a thrift store like an old lamp that didn't match the decor anymore. But what Marcus didn't know, what no one knew except my lawyer and my accountant, was that I had been planning something for months. Something that would teach him exactly what abandonment felt like. Something that would show him the true cost of treating your mother like she was disposable. Because sometimes, when someone shows you who they really are, you have to believe them. And sometimes you have to show them who you really are too. There was a time when Marcus thought I hung the moon and painted the stars. When he was little, maybe 5 or 6, he used to tell anyone who would listen that his mama was the smartest, prettiest, strongest woman in the whole wide world. He'd wrap his small arms around my legs when I came home from work, still in my waitress uniform, smelling like coffee and kitchen grease, and announce that he was going to marry me when he grew up. I'd laugh and ruffle his dark hair, the same shade as mine before the gray started creeping in, and tell him he'd find someone much better than his old mama someday. Back then, it was just the two of us against the world. Marcus's father had disappeared before his 2nd birthday, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and a baby who looked exactly like him. I was 22, working double shifts at Mel's Diner on Route 9, coming home to a cramped apartment above the laundromat where the walls were so thin you could hear every conversation, every argument, every late-night television program from the neighbors. But in that little apartment, Marcus and I built our own universe. We had pancake breakfasts on Sunday mornings, even if it was just the 99-cent mix from the grocery store. We had movie nights on the secondhand couch I'd bought for $30, sharing a bowl of popcorn and whispering commentary so we wouldn't wake the people downstairs. Marcus was brilliant, even as a toddler. He could count to 100 before he turned 3, and by 4 he was reading picture books to me at bedtime, his little finger following each word carefully across the page. Teachers loved him. He was polite, curious, always raising his hand with thoughtful questions. Other parents would compliment me on how well-behaved he was, how articulate, how clearly he'd been raised with love and attention. I'd beam with pride, knowing that despite everything we lacked materially, I was giving him something money couldn't buy, the absolute certainty that he was loved, valued, and worth fighting for. Those early years were hard financially, but they were rich in ways that mattered. When Marcus lost his first tooth, I made a big production of the Tooth Fairy's visit, leaving quarters under his pillow, along with a tiny handwritten note. When? He had nightmares. I'd crawl into his twin bed and tell him stories about brave little boys who could defeat dragons with nothing but their clever minds and kind hearts. When he wanted a bicycle for his 7th birthday, I worked extra shifts for 2 months, saving every tip until I could buy him a shiny red one from the local bike shop. The look on his face Christmas morning when he saw it propped against our little tree was worth every aching foot, every late night, every moment of exhaustion. I had dreams back then, ambitions that extended beyond the diner and the apartment. I'd started taking business classes at the community college, studying. Late into the night after Marcus went to bed, I had this vision of opening my own restaurant someday, a place where the food was exceptional and the atmosphere was warm, where families could come and feel special without breaking the bank. I'd sketch floor plans on napkins during slow shifts, imagining where the tables would go, what the menu would look like, how I'd train my staff to treat every customer like family. Marcus would sit at the kitchen table doing his homework while I studied, both of us working quietly in the lamplight. Sometimes he'd look up from his math problems and ask what I was learning about. I'd explain concepts like profit margins and customer service. And he'd nod seriously, as if he understood that Mama was working toward something bigger, something better for both of us. He'd say things like, "When you have your restaurant, Mama, I'm going to be your best customer." And my heart would nearly burst with love for this little boy who believed so completely in my dreams. When Marcus was 8, everything changed. I'd been waitressing at Mel's for 6 years, and I knew every regular customer's order by heart, could predict exactly how much each table would tip, could work a busy Friday night with my eyes closed. But I also knew it was a dead end. The owner, Mel himself, was a decent man, but not particularly ambitious. The place looked exactly the same as it had in 1975, complete with cracked vinyl booths and a coffee machine that temperamental on the best days. I wanted more, not just for me, but for Marcus, who was getting old enough to notice that his school clothes came from discount stores, and our grocery budget was perpetually tight. That's when I took the biggest risk of my life. I'd saved up $3,000, every penny earned through double shifts, careful budgeting, and the occasional small tip from a generous customer. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start something. I'd heard about a small cafe space for rent downtown. Nothing fancy, but in a good location near the courthouse and the community college. The rent was reasonable, and the previous tenant had left behind some basic equipment. I spent weeks creating a business plan, calculating costs, figuring out how to make it work. When I told Marcus about my plan to open Beverly's Kitchen, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "You mean you'll be the boss, Mama?" he asked. When I nodded, he threw his arms around me and said, "I always knew you were going to be somebody important." That night, we celebrated with ice cream for dinner and spent hours talking about what the restaurant would be like. Marcus suggested, "We should have a kids' menu with pictures, and maybe a little corner with books where families could sit and read together." His enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was stepping toward something instead of just surviving day to day. Opening Beverly's Kitchen was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The first few months were brutal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was working 18-hour days, cooking, serving, cleaning, doing the books, handling everything myself because I couldn't afford to hire help yet. Marcus would come straight from school to the restaurant, doing his homework at a corner table, while I prepped for the dinner rush. He became my unofficial mascot, charming customers with his polite manners and bright smile. Regular patrons started asking for Marcus's table and would slip him quarters for helping clear plates or refill water glasses. Slowly, gradually, the restaurant began to succeed. Word spread about the homemade pies, the generous portions, the warm atmosphere where everyone was treated like family. Local business people started coming for lunch meetings. College students discovered our affordable daily specials. Families made us their go-to spot for birthday celebrations and anniversary dinners. Within a year, I was able to hire 2 part-time servers and a weekend cook. Within 2 years, I was looking at expanding the space. Marcus was proud of me in those days, and he wasn't shy about showing it. He'd tell his teachers that his mama owned the best restaurant in town. He'd bring friends by after school, showing off the place like it was a palace. When his class had career day, he insisted I come speak about being an entrepreneur, wearing my best dress and explaining to a room full of 9-year-olds how you could start with nothing and build something wonderful through hard work and determination. Those were golden years when Marcus and I were a team, when he understood that everything I was building was for both of us, for our future together. He'd help me count the register at closing time, carefully stacking bills and coins while I recorded the day's sales. He'd taste test new recipes and give me honest feedback with the seriousness of a professional food critic. When customers complimented the food or the service, he'd beam as if the praise was directed at him too, which in a way, it was. He was part of Beverly's kitchen as much as I was. I started putting money away for his college education, opening a savings account that I contributed to every month without fail. I had visions of him going to a good university, studying business or law or whatever captured his imagination, armed with opportunities I'd never had. I wanted him to know that he could be anything, do anything, because his mother had shown him what was possible when you refused to accept limitations. The restaurant continued to grow. By the time Marcus was in middle school, Beverly's Kitchen had become an institution in our small town. We were written up in the local newspaper, featured in a regional magazine's article about hidden gems. I was able to buy a small house with a real yard where Marcus could play, in a neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. For the first time in our lives, we had stability, security, a foundation that felt solid. Marcus was thriving, too. He made the honor roll consistently, played on the school soccer team, had a close group of friends who spent weekends at our house playing video games and eating everything in the refrigerator. I loved having them around, these gangly 12 and 13-year-olds who called me Mrs. Anderson and complimented my cooking and treated our home like a safe haven. Marcus would roll his eyes when I fussed over his friends, but I could tell. He was proud to have the house where everyone wanted to hang out. The mom who remembered everyone's favorite snacks and asked about their families and their dreams. Looking back now, I think those middle school years were when Marcus started to change, though the shift was so gradual I didn't recognize it at the time. Success has a way of altering your perspective, especially when you're young and haven't yet learned to appreciate the journey as much as the destination. As Beverly's Kitchen became more successful, as our lifestyle improved, as Marcus's world expanded beyond our little 2-person family, he began to take for granted things that had once felt like miracles. He stopped helping at the restaurant after school, preferring to go to friends' houses or stay home playing video games. When I asked him to come by for dinner, he'd complain that he was tired of restaurant food, that he wanted to eat at home, like a normal family. The phrase normal family stung more than he probably realized, because I'd worked so hard to give him exactly that, a stable home and a mother who was present and engaged in his life. But apparently normal meant something different to him than it did to me. The first crack in our foundation came during his 8th grade graduation dinner. I'd planned a special celebration at Beverly's Kitchen, inviting his friends and their families, preparing all his favorite dishes. I'd even had a custom cake made with his picture and "Congratulations, Marcus" written in blue frosting. But when the evening arrived, Marcus seemed embarrassed by the whole thing. He was polite to the guests but distant with me, as if he was already pulling away from the world we'd built together. After everyone left and we were cleaning up, I asked him if he'd had a good time. He shrugged and said, "It was fine, Mom. But next time, could we maybe just go to a real restaurant?" The words hit me like a physical blow. A real restaurant. As if Beverly's Kitchen, the place I'd built from nothing, The place that had given us everything we had wasn't real enough for him anymore. I should have addressed it then, should have sat him down and reminded him where we'd come from, what we'd built together, why it mattered. But I was tired and hurt, and I told myself it was just teenage attitude, something he'd grow out of. I told myself that success had spoiled him a little, but that was a good problem to have, wasn't it? Better than worrying about where the next meal was coming from or whether we could afford school supplies. High school brought new challenges and new distances between us. Marcus was accepted into the accelerated academic program, surrounded by kids whose parents were doctors and lawyers and business executives. Suddenly, our modest success seemed small in comparison to their inherited wealth and effortless privilege. Marcus started making comments about wanting to go to private school, about how the public school wasn't challenging enough, about how all his smart friends were planning to attend prestigious universities that cost more per year than I made in profit from the restaurant. I worked harder, expanded Beverly's kitchen again, added catering services, started doing wedding receptions, and corporate events. The money was good, better than I'd ever imagined when I was slinging hash at Mel's diner. But the work was consuming, demanding, and Marcus was old enough now that he didn't need me to pick him up from school or help with homework or tuck him in at night. Our conversations became functional, logistical. Did he need money for this? Could I drive him there? Would I be home for dinner, or should he order pizza? I told myself this was normal too, that teenagers were supposed to individuate, to become their own people separate from their parents. I told myself that the distance was temporary, that once he got through the normal rebellions of adolescence, we'd find our way back to each other. I told myself that the foundation we'd built in those early years was strong enough to weather this storm. I was wrong about that too. The first time Marcus expressed real shame about our life was during his junior year of high school. He'd been invited to a party at the home of one of his classmates, a girl named Chelsea whose father owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 counties. When I dropped him off, I couldn't help but stare at the house, a sprawling colonial with circular drive and professionally landscaped grounds. It was beautiful, intimidating, the kind of place I'd driven past 1,000 times but never imagined stepping foot inside. When I picked Marcus up later that night, he was quiet, almost sullen. I asked about the party, whether he'd had fun, if the parents were nice. He mumbled non-committal responses until finally, as we pulled into our own driveway, he said, "Mom, when people ask what you do for work, can you just say you're in food service? You don't have to mention that you own a restaurant." The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. Food service. As if Beverly's kitchen was something to be ashamed of, something to hide. As if the work that had given him everything, the success I'd built with my own hands, the respect I'd earned in our community, was somehow embarrassing in front of his wealthy friends. I turned off the engine and looked at him in the dim light, from the porch. "Marcus, is there something wrong with owning a restaurant?" He sighed, the long-suffering exhale of a teenager who thinks his mother is being deliberately obtuse. "It's not wrong, Mom. It's just, these people's parents are lawyers and surgeons and business executives. They have, important jobs. Important jobs, as if feeding people, creating a gathering place for families, employing a dozen members of our community, building something from nothing wasn't important. As if the work that had lifted us out of poverty and given him opportunities wasn't worthy of respect. I wanted to argue with him, to remind him of all the lessons I'd taught him about hard work and dignity, and not judging people by their bank accounts. But I was too hurt, too stunned by his casual dismissal of everything I'd accomplished. So I just nodded and said, "Okay, honey, if that's what you prefer." That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when I'd become something my son was ashamed of. When had the woman who used to be his hero become an embarrassment? When had the life we'd built together become something he wanted to distance himself from? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was that success had changed Marcus in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just financially, but socially, emotionally. He was moving in circles now where wealth was inherited, not earned, where status came, from family names and trust funds rather than personal achievement. In that world, a woman who'd pulled herself up from waitressing to restaurant ownership wasn't impressive. She was just new money, working class, someone who'd gotten lucky but didn't really belong. And Marcus, my brilliant, ambitious son, wanted desperately to belong in that world, even if it meant leaving me behind. But I still believed, in those days, that love would win out in the end. I still thought that the bond between us was stronger than teenage social pressures, that the foundation we'd built together would hold. I still had faith that my son, the little boy who'd once told everyone I was the smartest woman in the world, was still in there somewhere underneath the designer clothes and affected mannerisms he'd picked up from his wealthy friends. I was determined to keep fighting for him, to keep showing him that success earned through hard work was nothing to be ashamed of. That family loyalty mattered more than social status. I thought I had time to win him back, to remind him who we were and where we'd come from. I thought wrong. Senior year arrived with all the pomp and anxiety that comes with impending adulthood, and Marcus threw himself into college preparations, with the single-minded determination of someone trying to escape rather than simply move forward. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. These names rolled off his tongue like prayers, spoken with a reverence I'd never heard him use when talking about anything else, including our family or our business. He spent hours researching these institutions, memorizing statistics about acceptance rates and average SAT scores, studying photographs of ivy-covered buildings and manicured quads as if he were planning a pilgrimage to sacred ground. I supported his ambitions, of course. What mother wouldn't? Want her child to reach for the stars? But there was something different about the way Marcus pursued these dreams, something that felt less like aspiration and more like desperation. He wasn't just wanting to attend a prestigious university, he was wanting to become someone else, entirely. Someone whose mother didn't smell like French fry oil at the end of a long day, someone whose family history didn't include second-hand clothes and food stamps, and nights when dinner was cereal, because we couldn't afford groceries until the next paycheck. The college application process became a minefield of small rejections and careful omissions. When Marcus asked me to review his personal essay, I was excited to see how he'd tell our story, how he'd frame his journey from a single mother's struggling household to academic achievement. But as I read, my excitement curdled into something much darker. The essay was beautifully written, articulate, and compelling, but it told the story of a young man who'd overcome adversity through his own determination and intellectual gifts. I appeared only as background scenery, a vague figure who'd provided basic necessities while he'd essentially raised himself through sheer force of will. There was no mention of Beverly's kitchen, no acknowledgement of how the restaurant had transformed our lives, no recognition of the nights I'd stayed up late helping him with homework or the mornings I'd driven him to academic competitions across the state. According to his essay, he was a self-made success story, a brilliant mind that had flourished despite humble circumstances rather than because of his mother's love and sacrifice. When I gently questioned some of the omissions, suggesting that our partnership in building the restaurant might be worth mentioning, Marcus looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "Mom, college admissions officers want to see independence and personal growth. They don't want to read about family businesses or help from parents. They want to see that I can succeed on my own merit. On my own merit, as if everything he'd achieved had happened in a vacuum, as if the stable home I'd provided, the values I'd instilled, the opportunities I'd created through years of backbreaking work were somehow irrelevant to his success. As if acknowledging my role in his life would diminish rather than enhance his accomplishments. I swallowed my hurt and told him the essay was wonderful, which it was. Technically speaking, it was polished and sophisticated, exactly the kind of thing that would impress admissions committees at elite institutions. But it was also a careful erasure of our shared history, a strategic reimagining of his life that positioned him as the sole architect of his achievements. The college interviews were another source of tension. Marcus had been accepted for alumni, interviews at several schools, meetings with graduates who would assess his character and potential fit with their alma maters. He prepared for these conversations with the intensity of a political candidate, practicing answers to potential questions, researching the backgrounds of his interviewers, even going so far as to buy new clothes that would project the right image. When I offered to drive him to his first interview at a coffee shop downtown, he declined. "I'll take the bus, Mom. It'll look more independent." When I suggested we could grab lunch afterward to celebrate, he shook his head. "I'm meeting some friends from school. We're going to compare notes about our interviews." These small rejections accumulated like paper cuts, each one insignificant on its own, but cumulatively creating a wound that wouldn't heal. Marcus was systematically removing me from the important moments of his life, creating boundaries where none had existed before, building a wall between us that seemed to grow higher with each passing week. The worst part was how reasonable his explanations always sounded. Of course he needed to demonstrate independence to college admissions officers. Of course he wanted to process these important experiences with peers who were going through the same thing. Of course he was nervous about the interviews and needed space to prepare mentally. Every exclusion came wrapped in logic that made me feel petty and needy for wanting to be included. But beneath the reasonable explanations, I sensed something else: shame. Marcus was ashamed of me, of our life, of the journey we'd taken together. He'd decided that our story wasn't impressive enough for the world he wanted to enter, that my presence in his narrative would somehow diminish his chances of being accepted into the elite circles he was determined to join. The acceptance letters arrived in March, and Marcus's methodical preparation paid off. He was accepted to Princeton, his first choice, along with several other prestigious schools. I was genuinely thrilled for him, proud of his academic achievements, and excited about the opportunities that lay ahead. But even his moment of triumph was tinged with exclusion. He opened the Princeton letter alone in his room, and I only learned about his acceptance when I heard him on the phone with his guidance counselor, his voice bright with excitement and relief. When he finally came downstairs to share the news, his enthusiasm was more subdued, as if he'd already processed the most important emotions privately and was now offering me a polite, edited version of his joy. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, pulling him into a hug that he returned briefly, before stepping away. "We should celebrate. We could close the restaurant early tonight and go to that steakhouse you like, or have a party here with your friends." "Actually, Mom, Chelsea's parents are throwing a celebration dinner for all the kids who got into Ivy League schools. It's tonight at their country club." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "It's kind of a formal thing, for students and their families." "For students and their families, but apparently not for my family." "Oh," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "That sounds lovely. What time should I be ready?" Marcus shifted his weight, not meeting my eyes. "The thing is, it's really expensive, like $200 a plate, and it's mostly families who've been members of the country club for years. I just thought." He trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging between us like a sword. I understood what he wasn't saying. The country club celebration wasn't for people like us, for mothers who'd built their success from nothing, for families whose wealth was measured in years of hard work rather than generations of inherited privilege. I wasn't invited because I didn't belong in that world, and Marcus didn't want to bring me into a situation where our differences would be highlighted. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "You should definitely go. It sounds like a wonderful opportunity to celebrate with your classmates." "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand." He looked relieved, as if he'd been bracing for an argument or tears. "Maybe we could do something tomorrow night, just the two of us?" But tomorrow night felt like a consolation prize, a lesser celebration. offered to make up for being excluded from the real one. I nodded and told him that sounded perfect, then excused myself to my bedroom where I could absorb the sting of rejection privately. That night, while Marcus was at the country club celebrating his acceptance to Princeton with families who'd never doubted their place in elite society, I sat in Beverly's kitchen after closing, surrounded by empty tables and the lingering smell of the day's specials. I thought about all the nights I'd worked late to save money for his college fund, all the dreams I'd nurtured about his future success, all the pride I'd felt watching him grow into the brilliant young man he'd become. I'd always imagined that when this moment came, when Marcus achieved the academic success we'd both worked toward, we'd celebrate together. I'd pictured us toasting his acceptance with champagne, calling relatives to share the good news, maybe even planning a special meal at the restaurant to mark the occasion with our extended family of employees and regular customers. I'd never imagined that his success would feel like the beginning of our separation rather than the culmination of our partnership. The summer before college was supposed to be a special time, a last chance to spend concentrated time together before Marcus left for Princeton. I'd planned to scale back my hours at the restaurant, maybe take a vacation together, help him prepare for this next chapter of his life. But Marcus had other plans. He'd gotten an internship at a prestigious law firm in the city, arranged through the father of one of his wealthy classmates, and he'd be spending most of the summer living in a furnished apartment near his workplace. "It's an incredible opportunity, Mom," he explained when he told me about the internship. "I'll be working with actual lawyers, sitting in on client meetings, getting real experience in corporate law. This could be huge for my resume." I was proud of his initiative, impressed that he'd secured such a competitive position. But I was also disappointed that he'd made these arrangements without discussing them with me, that he'd chosen to spend our last summer together in the city rather than at home. When I gently suggested that maybe he could commute from home, or work part-time so we could still have some time together, he looked at me as if I'd suggested he sabotage his own future. "Mom, this isn't some summer job at the restaurant. This is a professional opportunity with one of the most respected law firms in the state. I need to take it seriously, be fully committed. Living in the city is part of the experience." The comparison to some summer job at the restaurant stung more than he probably intended. Beverly's kitchen wasn't just a restaurant to me. It was the foundation of everything we'd built together, the source of his college fund, the place where he'd learned about work ethic and customer service and treating people with respect regardless of their economic status. But to Marcus, it had become a symbol of small-town limitations, something to be transcended rather than honored. He left for his internship in early June, promising to come home on weekends when his schedule allowed. The house felt enormous and empty without him, silent in ways that reminded me of those early days when he was small, and I'd sometimes feel the weight of single motherhood pressing down on me like a physical thing. But this emptiness was different, tinged with rejection rather than simple loneliness. Marcus did come home some weekends, but he was different during these visits, distracted and impatient, as if he was humoring me rather than genuinely wanting to spend time together. He'd sleep late, spend most of his waking hours on his phone or laptop, and seem eager to return to the city where his real life was apparently happening. When I suggested activities we used to enjoy together, cooking, elaborate meals, watching movies, visiting the farmer's market, he'd agree with the enthusiasm of someone checking items off a duty list. "How's the internship going?" I'd ask, genuinely interested in his experiences. "It's great, Mom. Really challenging. I'm learning so much about corporate law and client relations." His responses were polite but generic, the kind of updates you'd give to a distant relative rather than someone who'd invested 18 years in your development. "Are the other interns nice? Have you made friends?" "Yeah, they're cool. Most of them are from really good schools. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. It's nice to be around people who understand the academic pressure." People who understand the academic pressure. As if I hadn't been there for every late night of studying, every stress-induced breakdown over difficult assignments, every moment of doubt about whether he was smart enough or hardworking enough to achieve his goals. As if my support and encouragement over the years had been inadequate compared to the understanding he was finding among his privileged peers. The most painful conversation happened in late July during one of his brief weekend visits. I'd made his favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans, the comfort food he'd always requested when he was stressed or sad. As we sat at the kitchen table, I asked about his plans for the rest of the summer and the fall. Well, after the internship ends, I'll probably stay in the city for a few weeks. Some of the other interns are planning to do some traveling together before school starts. Then I'll need to get to Princeton early for orientation and freshman seminars. I set down my fork, processing what he was telling me. So you won't be coming home between the internship and school? Probably not, Mom.